My name is Timmy Hammond. I originally come from Sweden and I now live in London. I kind of got into sports like a lot of people, like when you're kids. I played football, or as you call it in America, soccer. And then I went into also playing handball, which is a sport that I can imagine a lot of your listeners are not as familiar with. But it's almost like a mix of basketball and American football to one extent. It's pretty physical. You need to be pretty tall, not as tall as a basketball player, etc. So in that part, when we were about 15, 16, they started sending us to the gym because it's a very physical sport. And I realized that I kind of like the gym. And then when I got 19, I went to the army. We had no national service in Sweden for a bit, and I kind of like stopped doing my regular training, and I had a couple of years out. And I even went and worked on cruise ships for a bit in my younger years. Fantastic time. Came back when I was 24, and I looked myself in the mirror, and I was like pretty overweight. I'd just been drinking, partying every single day for a couple of years, and I was just like, all right, this can't continue. I need to make a change here. Like I'm 24, I'm like the trajectory of my life in this way is like it's not going to be good. So I was like, I like the gym, so I started going back to the gym, exercising, and from that point, like I made pretty good progress right away, as you do when you kind of put your effort into the exercise, and all you've been doing before is kind of drinking and partying. So made progress, but I also studied engineering, so I'm always kind of been interested in science, and so I kept on kind of reading on things, nutrition, and getting in more and more to those things. And okay, my progress was right, but it wasn't like fantastic, and I was still didn't really reach where I wanted. But kept on triggling along in my professional career and having the exercise like 3 times a week type of thing. So compared to a lot of the guests you have here, I think I'm a little bit more recreational than that. But I'm also, as I said, I really like the science behind things, that I can dig down in details and listen to podcasts and so forth. And then kind of 3 years ago, I came across the Uberman Lab podcast, which I'm sure a fair amount of your listeners have dabbled with. It's for someone that's detail oriented like myself, it's fantastic. For people who not, maybe not so much. But and it was one episode he had there where he was talking about like how to use cold to improve your exercise performance. And I was like, okay, that sounds really interesting. Thought it was going to be a little bit about ice bath and those things, but this went in a completely different direction where he actually started talking about how our body heating up hugely impact our performance and the mechanisms behind that. Then he started talking about a couple of like, especially one study they'd done at Stanford, where they had a group of trained guys, like not professional athletes, but people at least 2 to 4 years of exercise experience, and they had them in doing pull-ups. So they did pull-ups, rested 3 minutes, pull-ups, and they did 10 sets, which is a pretty big amount of volume. And then they started cooling the palms of their hands with a mechanism they've created between every set and they came in for 6 weeks, twice a week. And at the end of that, they had increased the amount of pull-ups they could do by 144%. And I mean, anybody who's done a bit of strength training, that amount of increase when you're not the absolute newbie, even if you're a newbie, I would say, like that's just insane gains. And I was just like, this is fantastic. Like, I sounds super interesting. And then I read the study, and I kind of like, yeah, this seems legit. Like, this wasn't anything like weird with the study, etc. Like methodology and everything seemed legit. And then Huberman did another podcast about it, where he had Craig Geller, Dr. Craig Geller, in that had kind of done these tests, and the people who kind of came up with it, because they started researching on this to help people decrease the temperature when they have been like for firemen and stuff like that. But then they saw an exercise implementation of it. And then I heard they had Greg Clark, who was a tight end at San Francisco 49ers in as well, because he used to play for Stanford. So he kind of heard about this because word got around a bit, and he was like, I kind of want to try it. So he came in and they asked him what are you good at? And he's like, I can do a lot of dips. Dips is kind of my thing. And so they had him do dips, rested 3 minutes, dips, rested 3 minutes. And after 5 sets, he was kind of like, I'm done. Like, I'm too tired. I can't continue. And he had done 103 reps in total. Okay, that's pretty good. Then he comes in 3 days later, and they start doing palm cooling on him. And first step, he does 42. People watching this time, so he manages to squeeze out a little bit more. Second set, he can actually do 8 reps more. Like, huge increase. And he continues to do more repetitions each set. So when he's done 5 sets, he's at 135. That's a 30% increase for an NFL player, like someone that's in his peak condition. What is even more interesting is that after 5 sets, he's like, you know what? I can continue doing more. So he could do 9 sets before he was kind of like, I'm done. So he increased the total workload. He did that workout by 80%, the amount of repetitions he could do. Then they had him come in every second, twice a week for 5 weeks. And at the end of it, the total workload he had increased was 201% on an NFL player. Like, it's just insane gains.
Mm-hmm.
I looked into this and I was like, I somehow gotta try this. Like, I'm like, often you hear things and you're like, oh yeah, you can do this and this and this and this, and you're like, oh, you get a 4% increase. I'm like, yeah, it's a lot of hassle to get 4% increase. But he was like, you know what, this doesn't seem too cumbersome, and the gains are just like, I mean, it beats steroids with like miles. So I was like, I gotta try this. And so I thought about, like, okay, so the guys who kind of came up with this, they had created a device. You could be on a waiting list for X amount of time, and it was $1,500 for one hand, and you would ideally do both hands. It was like $3,000. I'm like, I want to try this, but I don't want to try that much. So what I did was that I was like, okay, I can cool my hands by water. So I got myself a bucket that I brought to the gym. And what's important with this as well is that, like, you shouldn't kind of have an ice cube in your hands. That's not how you get the best cooling, because then the blood vessels in your hand constrict because it's too cold. So based on the research, you should be about 15 degrees Celsius, so about 45, 50 Fahrenheit is kind of the optimal temperature to not get too cold, but to get the best cooling effect. So I sat there with my bucket, but generally where I was in the UK, in London, the tap water isn't really the right temperature for that. So I brought ice cubes to be able to keep the right temperature in my little ice bucket every time. So I kind of, and then I tried to replicate a bit what I did with a 3-minute rest between sets. And I did a couple of different exercises. And the one where I increased the most, which was shoulder press, because I had higher rep ranges there. I increased 48% in 5 weeks, and I'm 40 plus with over 15 years experience in the gym.
Are you a personal trainer, online fitness coach, or gym owner on the verge of burnout? Are you wanting to grow your fitness business but can't add more hours to your hectic schedule? Introducing Trainer Revenue Multiplier, the premier wealth creation system for fitness professionals that helps you earn more and work less. Visit www.trainerrevenuemultiplier.com today to schedule your free business accelerator session. If you're serious about taking your business to the next level, schedule your call today. The Weight Room Podcast is thrilled to announce our new sponsor, Prime Science. They're leaders in harnessing scientific research to revolutionize your fitness journey. With a firm foundation in the latest health sciences, Prime Science offers innovative products to help you achieve and surpass your fitness and health goals. These tools are more than just accessories. They're the result of rigorous scientific research aimed at optimizing your health. Dive deeper into how you can transform your approach to fitness at primescience.co.uk. Trust me, with Prime Science, you're in scientifically sound hands.
Really, really good gains. What I have realized afterwards on this is that actually the water isn't the optimal kind of like, this gets into thermodynamics and I don't want to go too deep in that, but the water heat transferability isn't as good as metal. So it's better to have something to hold in or like to touch your hands that is metal that has the right temperature than the water. So that's one area where kind of might be a reason why I didn't on all the exercises do as well. And also it seems like this works significantly better, or the impact is larger the more reps you do. You see the impact larger than, which is natural if you think about the fact that it is about the muscle overheating. That's the problem, and you kind of cool that down with cooling the palms of your hands. And if we go in a little bit more to kind of like the details about why this works, like I did talk a little bit about the things as well earlier around studies on strength training. This works as well on cardio. They have done or endurance. They have done a study where they had cyclists doing a time trial. And when they did that obviously on a stationary bike, because it's easier to kind of with your hands, when they did palm cooling, they cut down the time. I think it was from about 16 minutes to 55 minutes, which is pretty big gain of. These were not professional athletes, but they were like good recreational cyclists. So, and cutting it down like 5 minutes on an hour time trial, that's like a very, very large gain. The reason why this works, and what Huberman spoke a lot about in the podcast, was that our body is a fantastic machine. Like, it has so many protection mechanisms and everything to make sure that we're kind of thriving and especially not dying. And our body actually is not that, is very sensitive to overheating, because like if you think about it, if we look Fahrenheit, you're like 98.5 degrees is general, 99 degrees. As soon as you get to like 106, you go to the hospital because you're very, and 107, 108, and you're dead. It's a very narrow spectrum that we can actually operate in. And especially on the heating side, you can actually drop temperature a bit more than you can increase your temperature before you start getting in real trouble. And because of this, our body has put in a lot of different defense mechanisms to ensure that we don't overheat. And this goes both systematically over our entire body and locally in the muscle. Because if we start working a muscle, we can increase the energy production in the muscle 50 to 60 times. And our body isn't a particularly effective machine, because what the energy that's produced in the muscle, 80% of that is lost as heat and 20% is for actual mechanic movements. That means that we can increase the heat production in the muscle 50, 60 times, but the blood flow doesn't increase that much. So you heat up the muscle, and that's why like you get warm and you work out and you start sweating. But we have that huge increase in heat production, and that can heat us up to a stage where we get overheated and die, or it can also locally cook our muscle. So that's obviously very dangerous territory for our body. So the body has put in a protection mechanism. So in the muscle, there is an enzyme called pyruvate kinase that helps produce the ATP. And this enzyme is very heat sensitive. And as soon as the temperature goes up a little bit in the muscle, the energy production start to get shut down so we don't overheat. So when you think about that, like as soon as your muscle heats up, the ATP starts shutting down the production of it, and it leads to failure significantly faster. If you can systematically cool down our body, we can work out for longer, like in these studies. That's kind of what the research behind all this. They realized that like, all right, the energy production shuts down. And what is interesting about it, it's more than a local effect as well. It impacts our mind and how we feel fatigued. If you think about it, like if you're in a very warm environment, when it's like, let's say 80, 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside, most of us don't feel like doing anything. We just lie there and like, and this is the body's way of saying like, mate, don't go out and run a marathon now because it's so warm outside, you can overheat and that leads to death. Evolution is so smart, so it's given kind of taught us or created a mechanism that so we don't even want to go and do that. So if you're in an environment like that, you jump in a pool, instantly you feel refreshed and you're like awake because the body feels, oh, it's cool, it's nice. I'm not afraid of overheating. So that's actually the physical mechanism that makes that work and makes it work that way. So, and as I said, like if we can systematically cool down our bodies, we can then work out for longer like they did in the studies. And this is where it starts getting really interesting because there is 3 places on our body that are much more efficient to cool down than anywhere else. And most people would assume it's kind of like the main like arteries and things like that. But that's actually not the case. We have 3 surfaces on our body where we have what's called glabrous skin. And it means that there is no hair follicles. Even though like most of us don't have hair all over our bodies, we have hair follicles on all areas except these ones. And it's the palms of our hand, bottom of our feet, and the face above the beard line. Same for females, it's the same area. And these areas have completely different blood vessels called AVA, arteriovenous anastomosis. But those blood vessels are thinner and very dense. And how they also work differently is that instead of kind of going through thin capillaries on the way to the heart, they go straight to the heart through very like, instead of taking smaller off roads, it goes straight on the freeway all the way to the heart and cools us down much faster. And there is some evolutionary reason for this, which they haven't really found out. But this means that these are the 3 most effective areas to cool down or heat up our body. And if you think about it, if we walk out and it's really cool outside, cold outside, one of the first things we do is take our hands and rub them together. And that helps us heat up. So instinctively, there is a couple of things like that we have learned that this is actually the best areas to cool up and cool down our body. And the same if you kind of go towards, if you're cold and you go towards a fire, you put your hands up and you heat them up first to kind of feel that heat. And so, like as I said, there is a few things here that we have learned instinctively that this works like that, but we kind of haven't known the reasons behind that.
Are you a personal trainer, online fitness coach, or gym owner on the verge of burnout? Are you wanting to grow your fitness business but can't add more hours to your hectic schedule? Introducing Trainer Revenue Multiplier, the premier wealth creation system for fitness professionals that helps you earn more and work less. Visit www.trainerrevenuemultiplier.com today to schedule your free business accelerator session. If you're serious about taking your business to the next level, schedule your call today. The Weight Room Podcast is proud to be partnered with Prime Science, our new sponsor and a trailblazer in health technology. Prime Science is dedicated to pushing the boundaries of what's possible in health and fitness through extensive research and scientific validation. Their products are a testament to their commitment to safe, scientifically backed health optimization. To learn more about how Prime Science is redefining fitness with valid science, visit primescience.co.uk. Join us in embracing a future where fitness meets rigorous scientific practice with Prime Science.
That's why we kind of implement this with palm cooling, because you could have done it with the bottom of your feet or the forehead as well. However, that's not as practical in the end of the day. Like in most applications, I can see this like from a more endurance perspective or something like that. Having something that cools down, that kind of sits on your forehead or something, could be a good application of that, because having something in your hand when you do that might be harder, so to speak. But yeah, that's the reason why kind of implement palm cooling or palmar cooling, as some people call it, to reach this, but very, very large improvements in physical performance.
What is that kind of mental transition from I'm doing a rep and I'm, I can feel the heat, literally around me and my body temperature, and then you grab the bar and it kind of cools you down and you kind of go to that like that place, you talked about mentally that you just kind of feel more refreshed, but then you put it down and then you go back to that set. What is that experience like, going from the cool temperature back to the kind of the warmer ambient air to the cool? Like what is that like?
I would say it isn't that big because if you like what you're doing here is that you're just holding a bar. So it's only your hands rather than, so if we do the comparison with jumping in the pool, that's your entire body submerged in water. And the temperature difference is larger. Like you have like it's 80 degrees or something like outside, and then you jump in the pool that's maybe 56, about 60. So the temperature difference there is larger, and it's a significantly larger surface area that, so you don't have that kind of like refresh kick that you would get when you jump in a pool. However, you will just feel like, you come out of the set, you go in and you hold this one, and when you go into the next one, you feel that a bit more refreshed. It's not like you would jump in a pool. It isn't that big of an effect. You just feel a little bit more refreshed. And then also throughout your workout, like towards the end of it, you're not as fatigued. You're just not like, obviously it depends on how one trains. If it's more powerlifting, it's different. But you're not like, kind of, if you do a normal style gym session over an hour, a bit over an hour, towards the end of that one, if you've done that properly, you're pretty fatigued. Like you should be tired, but you don't have really that. And that's one of the benefits that I've seen when I use these protocols. Is kind of like, training is a bit more fun because I'm not like knackered at the end of it. Like I have more energy. It's like, even though I push myself, like towards the end of the workout, I'm not exhausted. I'm still tired, but I'm not exhausted. But I can keep on pushing further. So yeah, I wouldn't say with this you have the same kind of like smash impact as you do if you jump in a pool when it's really warm outside, because the, yeah, it doesn't impact as much. And what you're looking for here is also less of a, especially in the gym where I have used it mainly. It could be different if you're kind of like a cyclist or something with that, because that's more systematic. But the gym, you work on a couple of muscle groups, or as you kind of squats and stuff, maybe a little bit different, where it's more general heating, but like it kind of cools down the blood, so it can cool down that muscle locally better. But throughout the workout, you will feel more energetic towards the end, or less fatigued. But yeah, it won't be the kind of like huge difference where you just feel like, oh, now I'm kind of like getting almost like a battery charged while you hold it, and as soon as you leave it, like it's like you unplug yourself from the wall. It's not that kind of impact of it. It isn't really.
So when it comes to you mentioned there the feeling of, okay, I'm doing my hour workout and I'm not feeling as just completely drained at the end. Is that something where you want to be okay with that feeling? Because there's, like you said, there's a lot of people who kind of go for that. I got to go till I'm exhausted. I got to go till I'm, have nothing left in the tank. Is that where it's like, all right, let me, if that's my goal, or whatever, is that where, like, okay, let's keep pushing, let's keep going for another 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes? Or is it better to just be like, all right, the hour, my workout is up, I've done what I said I'm going to do, whatever is on my paper, my coach wrote it, I wrote it, whatever, I've done it, and so now I'm done? Or is it like, all right, well, maybe let's go for another couple sets or couple, new exercises because I'm feeling good? Which one have you found is more effective for the long term success?
I haven't done any like advanced testing of that kind of like, you know but generally, like, if you have I think it all depends very much on your goals in the end of the day. Like I do gym training to, like, not pro bodybuilding type of, but like it's kind of in that spectrum rather than the powerlifting spectrum and so forth. So I just keep on pushing myself, and like from my experience, that keeps on building muscle. And there is also an anecdotal thing from the guys at Stanford, which I find interesting. They wanted to try if this also worked for women, because as we know, most of these studies are kind of like, there is a tendency to do things on men. And then, so they tried it on female students, and they did like push-ups to failure, rested push-up. And towards the end of it, they had females that could do over 800 push-ups in an hour, which is pretty big. Yeah. And then they kind of came and said, like, told him, Dr. Geller, you cost us a lot of money. And it's like, why? We needed to buy new sleeveless dresses for the formal dances because they basically grown out of their formal wear. So, yeah. In the end of the day, if you think about it from that perspective, if you can do more sets and more repetitions, you will kind of drive a further inroad. You get closer to failure. And I actually think this is a very interesting thing if we look at it from a research perspective, because knowing what we kind of has talked about today, all the studies that have been done is on people where actually the muscle overheats. You know what I mean? Like this is because that's how we train. If you can kind of change that so people don't overheat, so because if we look at this now, if we take the example of the NFL playing doing dips, he could, with not overheating, he could increase the amount of reps he could do set number 2 significantly. Okay, this was a significantly higher rep range, but you can do that on lower as well, and you can squeeze maybe 1 rep more out and so forth. And that that means that it's actually overheating and the ATP production that's shut off rather than the muscle really reaching failure, set 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., etc. And if people start implementing that, will that throw out the research that we have around what's the optimal amount of sets? Because you will reach closer to failure, set 2, 3, 4, and all those ones. And when I think about it, it's kind of, it makes me think about, is this one of the reasons why the Metzer and Dorian Yates type of training works well, especially for some, that, you do that first set and you really reach failure on that one and you go really deep failure. And then the sets after that are not going to you're not going to reach failure. You're going to add volume. But are you now, if people train with cooling their palms properly, can they then reach, like after 2, 3 sets, then they've reached failure enough time to, there is so much of when you understand how this impacts the muscles and how close you actually are to failure, even though you feel like you can't lift the weight, so you failed, but the muscle hasn't failed because it's actually the ATP production that's shut off because the body is afraid of overheating.
Right.
So there is so much of this that can be completely overthrown because there is a limiting factor that people haven't known about and the research hasn't known about before.
This podcast is sponsored by Smoking Gun Coffee, a veteran-owned coffee company that strives to give back to those in need. Don't forget to use code TWR10 for a 10% discount at checkout.
I haven't done any kind of specific tests to that detail on that. And I was saying, first, when I started doing this, I was sitting with my hands in water buckets, and don't get me wrong, I like the gains, but it's very, very unpractical to need to wipe your hands. And I had this one, and just you move it around the gym, I have a big water bucket and my eyes, and I had a little rod to measure the temperature, etc. Gains were great, but it was so unpractical. Mm-hmm. So what I did for a while was that I kind of sat with just a ice, what do you call it? An ice pack, but that's too cold. So I had a towel and things. But what I then realized is that from a heat transferability perspective, that's really ineffective. It did help. I could feel I was less tired. I actually made pretty good gains on that. But that's when I started as I said, I started engineering, so I'm an electrical engineer, and I kind of like those things and know basics, thermodynamics. And I started to really look into this more in detail. And I was like, oh yeah, that what I've been doing so far, even the water wasn't optimal from a heat transferability perspective. So and I started looking, okay, what materials transfer heat the best, and how can I because what you also need, it was easy to kind of find, okay, aluminium or aluminium is really good for this, and it's fairly cheap and stuff. So I could do that. But then you need something that kind of maintains the temperature as well. So I kept on working on this, and I tried a lot of different things, and yeah, did research from a thermodynamic perspective, what maintains heat or cold, and back and forth. And I spent a lot of hours and money, etc., trying to figure out a way to really kind of like optimize this. And that's what, after I don't know how long time, like a year and a bit more, that's where I kind of got a significantly more mobile device, which is just simply a bar that you hold in your hands, like the one I sent to you. And it's comparably with what I used at the start, it's much easier to use.
How did you see that recovery was in your own personal experience was affected? Because you're being able to do more. So does that mean that your body is responding like you're doing more, or because you're, cooling, does the cooling aspect at all affect the recovery either, that day, or you're the delayed onset muscle soreness? Does that change as well with it, or does that still continue to be like an increase factor because you're doing more work?
So my experience and the also the anecdotal, there isn't any kind of like, I like to always point out this isn't like, they haven't done studies and control and publish this, but my experience and other people's experience is like, for example, if we go back to Greg Clark, the NFL player, like he was like, he done so much work, he's like, I am gonna be sore tomorrow. And that's kind of what you feel like when you have got done that much more work. Wake up the day after, fine. The mechanisms around this, not really understood yet, but it seems like it has a positive impact on recovery as well, and it does decrease DOMS for sure. Like that is both mine and the anecdotal experience from others that have tried these protocols. Don't fully know the mechanisms around that yet, but it does seem to speed up your recovery. And that's an interesting one as well. Like if we look then at, as I was talking about before, like it can throw around a lot of the research that has been done, because if it also speeds up, like you can get closer to failure, but you recover faster. That's a little bit like the holy grail of like weight training. Like you can go closer to failure and you back to basics faster. Like it can throw out so much if you look at that as well, because it could speed up the recovery. You might be able to train the same muscle group to proper failure faster without overtraining.
It really does start to like open the door to, well, if if our muscle and our bodies can take on more work, where do we redefine like traditional training?
I've done a lot around this and I'm kind of like in the weeds of it, but I'm convinced that in 10 years time, maybe even shorter, because we live in a society where information spreads faster today through podcasts and everything. But in 10 years time, people are going to look at temperature regulation in the same way as they do look at sleep today. If you go back 20 years, people didn't consider the sleep as important. Today, it's core thing. And I think temperature regulation will be the same thing in 10 years time when the understanding of this has really spread. There is like, there is so much things this can impact. Like, I just think about, you were talking about there, like the bodybuilder split and stuff like that. Like, I have actually changed the way I do my workouts to improve the local cooling. So let's say I would do a chest and back session. I do one chest exercise, one back, one chest, one back, because that gives more time for the trained muscle group to cool down in the middle when I do the other one. And I'm thinking, like, for example, like you do leg, the way I would do legs today, I actually do legs and then I do a tricep exercise in between. So I get my body to, because that's a small muscle group. So I get to cool down systematically. I do my pump cooling in between. And then I go like, because otherwise you do, let's say, squats, and then you hit the leg press straight off of that. Like it's going to really bring your temperature up. And I know how that impacts. So I put in working out my triceps in between. That's just like and I don't have any, can you say, scientific backing for that, but logically knowing how this works, that should work out pretty well. Mm-hmm. Like, and I do feel less fatigued at the end of such a workout. So yeah, it's so much things this can really throw out, and I find it fascinating.
With the 3 minutes of cooling or of rest between the sets of in the study, is that something that you want to cool for 3 minutes, or is that something that you want to cool for X amount of time and then rest the rest, like without the cooling for the rest of the time?
What you want to do is that you want to cool as much as possible. That is kind of the thing. They've just used 3-minute rest intervals. I guess they wanted to standardize and have enough rest and so forth. What generally actually, like if you have shorter rest intervals, this becomes more effective. Because if you think about it, the longer your rest intervals, the more you recover and the less kind of the cooling will impact. For example, if you look at like the power lifters, they bring down their heart rate, they rest for 5, 6, 7 minutes to be completely back. There it might impact a little bit, or naturally will impact less, because what they kind of do that. But if you have shorter rest intervals, the body has less time to cool down the muscle you just worked. So in the end of the day, what you want to do is cool as much as possible. And this kind of impacts as well, like what you wear when you work out. Like, don't have big pump covers and those type of things, because that's going to heat up your body. So think about it. Even if you don't use, I mean, I obviously advocate for a pod cooling device like our bar, because it really makes an impact. But even without that, like, think about it. Don't wear, just try to be as cool as possible, because it's going to have both the local and a long-term through the workout impact on your body. Like, don't wear gloves, for example, because that will insulate one of your big outlets. Don't wear like a beanie or something at the gym. It might look cool, but that's actually going to shut down the glabrous skin area in your face and insulate that. And so those areas you really want to have cool. Obviously, your feet is kind of like, you can't really walk around barefoot in most gyms. So that's, but like, just don't wear tons of clothing. Think about trying to be as cool as possible. Like, if you're in a place where you have outdoor gyms, like, I mean, I'm thinking Muscle Beach in Venice Beach type of thing. Like, if you work out there and it's like, 30 odd Celsius or 80 whatever Fahrenheit, that's like not a good environment. You want to have like, if the gym could really like run their air conditioned hugely, that's actually beneficial. Like, those type of things, like, try to be as cool as possible through your workout. And the more intense your workouts are, the more it's going to impact. The more you sweat, the more this is going to kind of benefit you overall. That, I think, it's like the general rule of thumb when it comes to these things.
I mean, it's fascinating, and I'm excited to see where the future goes. And like I said, I'm excited to implement this within my training. And I really appreciate you coming on here to talk about that and to kind of inform us and enlighten us on the potential and possibility of cooling within exercise. So I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Like, as I said, I am super excited about this. It's like, it's an area that I think has gone missed, because the first studies were done in like 2010, 2013. So it has been somewhere there, and it started to get a little bit more traction. But like, I'm very happy to be an advocate for it and bring it out to the community. That I think it can really, really help. That's, in the end of the day, like, I know, as you were saying, so many people, they're looking for an extra percent here or there too. Maybe 3 would be fantastic, and like, we're talking double digits without the shadow of a doubt here. And it is also actually conditioning. So like, if you train with pump cooling, you can then kind of repeat that. They've done one test where they had someone starting doing pump cooling, improved, then they took away the pump cooling, and then they went horizontal for a bit, started pump cooling, and they kept on increasing. So it kind of has that effect as well for anybody doing competitions and things. Like, it's not like it just disappears when you're not using it. So yeah, I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely something else good to know. But Like I said, I really appreciate you coming on. And if you want to, before you head out, if you want to share any socials or websites or contact info or anything like that, you can.
Yeah. So if anybody want to kind of buy our device or hit us up, it's primescience.co.uk, or you can just Google Prime Science as a UK company, and you can find our bar on our website. And you can also find us on Instagram, Prime Science Health, and other platforms. We're going to increase that soon as well. And it's going to be Prime Science Health. It's going to be our tag at all the other ones. And if you have any questions around this, just go to our website and ping us an email and I'll respond to that. I'm super excited talking to anybody who kind of finds this interesting, because I find it absolutely fascinating.
If you're tired of searching for a coach or trainer, somebody who knows what they're talking about and has experience, make sure you go check out the new Coach's Corner on weightroompodcast.com. You can find quality, qualified coaches to help you achieve your goals, whether that's in bodybuilding or just general fitness. Stop wasting time and start achieving your goals today. The link to the Coach's Corner is down in the description below.